Hi, welcome back. In this section, we're going to take a look at our first use case scenario. For the purposes of this exercise, let's do a bit of a history lesson. So let's pretend that we are either a contractor doing kind of owner's rep services, or maybe we're just a homeowner trying to compare a proposal that we got from a solar integrator. So we're going to look at just a residential PV only system. Let's call it, how about Bill's house? Much better. This is a residence, and we're only interested in PV only. So as you'll notice, when we go residential PV only, the PV discounted cash flow and the hybrid discounted cash flow lines overlay each other. Because we're so zoomed in here, I'm going to shrink this chart just a little bit so that it fits closer on the page. I'm going to bring it over here. There we go. Much better. Now we can see it all. So we're interested in history here. So let's go back to 2009. Now the calculator only goes back to 2014 because anything before that's pretty much irrelevant. And we can handle that no problem. The only thing that would affect right now in this calculator is the investment tax credit. Everything else we can manually input. So we'll take care of that when we get there. So right now 2014 is just the same as 2009. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that the proposal that we're analyzing had electricity entered at 14.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Let's also assume that there was an escalator shown. I remember seeing quite a few proposals that had escalation rates anywhere between 1.5 to 3.5%. So let's kind of split the difference and just go 2% escalation per year. Now, if you have a keen eye, you'll notice that this line really starts to flatten out. And that's because 2% escalation rate begins to compound annually or monthly, and it really almost starts to get carried away. So a little hidden function of the tool is if you go to the filter button, we can put the PV cash flow line back in, and that doesn't account for the time value of money. So we'll hit apply. And now you can see what happens if you don't account for the time value of money. The line really starts to run away and you get almost an exponential return from your investment. While we're here, let's also turn off the hybrid cash flow just to keep things clean because we're doing PV only. Now, for some of the people that may be watching this video and aren't really deep in the weeds with financial analysis, I want to talk briefly, do a little sidebar about the time value of money. Because it's important, and if you don't account for it, your financial pro forma is probably going to be dramatically over-optimistic, as you can see by the difference of your system's net present value of $500,000 versus $1.5 million. Pretty sizable difference. So the time value of money has to do with the fact that $1 today is not the same value as $1 in 20 years because of inflation. For instance, if you bought a pack of gum for $2 today, that same pack of gum may cost you $4 in the future. Similarly, $1 today is worth more than $1 in the future because you can invest that dollar. And if you invest that dollar in an interest-bearing financial vehicle, that dollar is going to grow over time. So dollars today are more important than dollars tomorrow. This calculator accounts for that with the discount rate. So as you'll see, if I change this to 0% per year, the PV cash flow and the PV discounted cash flow are going to directly overlap each other because this takes the effect of interest, or the effect of the time value of money out of the equation. So now they're directly overlapping. And let's get rid of that other line while we're here, once again to keep things as clean as possible. So now we have, yet again, a slightly more optimistic cash flow. Let's talk about SRECs. In Pennsylvania in 2008, 2009, the market was good, maybe almost $300 per megawatt good. Right next door in New Jersey, the market was even better. They were having SRECs at $600 per megawatt hour. So it wasn't totally unreasonable to think the PV market, being a little bit newer, is just gaining momentum. And maybe in the next contract period, we're able to get $450 per megawatt hour on the SREC. But to be reasonable, let's assume we can only do that for 3 years. And if you're watching, you're noticing this line shake all around. And then after that, due to a little bit of uncertainty, let's put in a value of $150 per megawatt hour. What you're noticing is all these slope changes, and we'll cover that very shortly. PV size, 500 kilowatts. That is way too big for a residence. Let's put in a pretty big system for a residence, and the PA Sunshine rebate program's maximum allowable size of 10 kilowatts for a residence. We're not going to use a multi-port inverter right now. This number is slightly off because it's considered from the battery inverter size, so we can just ignore that for now. It doesn't affect anything. And we're going to skip this. Now let's go to PV system performance. Base capacity factor. This is how many kilowatt hours of AC energy your system produces per kilowatt of DC capacity installed. This we'll do a separate video for how to calculate that with some performance calculator. PV watts is a great example. All you have to do is enter in the details of your system, you get the energy out, and then you divide it by the system size, and you get kilowatt hours per kilowatt. So we'll be a little bit more conservative here and go to 1050. System pricing information. This was back in 2009. Definitely not a ton of economies of scale. So $5.50 is probably reasonable. Let's undo that and bring this chart along with us. But before we do that, I'm going to do a quick little Excel trick so that we can bring the ROI and payback with us as well. So we're going to insert a text box. This one is going to be ROI. We're going to copy it. Control Shift. This is payback. Want some colons here. Then we want both of these, so Shift click, and then Control Shift click comes over here. And we want this text box to equal, we can set a formula in the text box, this, and we want this text box, delete, click in the formula bar, hit equals, payback, enter. Now we have ROI and payback. If I click on them all, I'm missing, click that one, grab that one, grab that one, grab that one, we will group them. Then we will bring them onto this chart. Then we will group the chart. Now that'll come with us, and we can get rid of the ribbon. So let's bring this down here as we go into performance and pricing. Let's set performance back just so you can see the change. Is at 13. Well, the magnitudes are a little bit off now because the system price is still so low. But let's bring that to 1050. It's paying back in 2.75 years. And let's increase the price to something more reasonable, $5.50 per watt. Now we've got an ROI of 24%, a payback of 11 years. Not horrible, but we can do better. We'll put an inverter replacement in because we're being thorough. And that's going to happen in year 7. So you can see that tick appear here where the homeowner would have had to buy a new inverter. Bring this back. We'll get rid of O&M because many of these systems were sold Maintenance free. The rain does all the cleaning you'll need. So we get rid of that. Insurance we're going to leave in. It's a pretty minimal cost here. $50 a year, just add it on to your homeowner's insurance policy. That's probably pretty reasonable. So we'll go over here now to tax implications and rebates and incentives. This system's for a homeowner, so they're not writing off their electricity expense on their taxes. So we'll get rid of that. That increases the ROI and decreases the payback. Depreciation is off. Bonus depreciation is off. They're not a commercial entity, so they can't depreciate assets. That's why the PPAs grew, basically, so that a commercial entity could capture that tax equity. But that's another conversation for another time. So now let's build in the rebate. In Pennsylvania, back in 2009, there was a program called the PA Solar Sunshine Program. It was a cash-based rebate that was capacity-based. So to show it, it's capacity-based, so it was dollars per watt installed, not performance-based. And back then, they were giving something like $2.50 per watt. So at the end of year one, you were going to get, well, as soon as your paperwork went through, effectively, you were going to get a cash rebate check from the state. And you can see that right here as this big vertical cash flow line at the end of year one. For the purposes of this calculator, rebates and tax incentives happen at the end of the year. So they are getting the 30% ITC, and they are also getting the $2.50 per watt rebate. So now this system, even at a fairly expensive installed price by today's standard, is paying back in the middle of between years 4 and 5. Sounds like a pretty stellar investment. And indeed it was. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But let's take a look at another little exercise of the SREC market crash. So systems were being sold at SRECs of $300 per megawatt. Well, that didn't last very long. So if all of a sudden you needed to start being conservative, I'd say, all right, well, it's not going to increase. It's going to decrease. Well, let's put this to 150. Well, now your payback's starting to slow down and your return on investment starting to change as well. And then what sadly happened in Pennsylvania, after just a couple years, say they got 3 years at $300, but so that would be 2011. Let's give them 4 years. And then by 2012, the SRECs dropped precipitously to like $75 per megawatt and below. Now that really starts to have an effect. And if they weren't able to capture $300 per megawatt hour in the first 3 years, maybe they only got that for a year and a half. Now your system's not paying back right away. It's taking almost 10 years to pay back. So let's bring those back to the values we had. Just hitting Control Z a couple times. Back to 300, 450, and 150. And we'll take a look at financing options. Oop, I missed my cells. All right. Little Excel glitch. You got to click off of it if you want to bring the text box with you. So now let's look at the financing. Let's say, for instance, Bill, living in his house, can get a home equity line of credit. What's that going to look like? Let's assume that he wants to take a loan out on the entirety of this system. So all you have to do to model that is put in 100% borrowed. 4.25% interest rate on a 10-year term. Well, that's, I don't know, maybe reasonable for a small business loan, but maybe he's able to get a home equity line of credit at 2.5% solar specific loan, and that's a 20-year term. Well, now your system starts to look like this. Because it's a home equity line of credit, you can probably also write your interest off. So you're going to see the ROI increases even further. Now your payback is being calculated here at less than a year, almost instantaneously, because what's happening is your loan payment at this low interest rate on a 20-year term, your loan payment is less than the return in the avoided cost of electricity you're saving. So your system outpaces your loan payments right away. Now this is assuming you were going to make your standard payments over the life of the loan for 20 years. The area under this interest paid curve obviously is your financing expense. But let's assume that you take those cash-based incentives and the ITC value that you get as a tax credit and you apply that directly onto your loan principal to dramatically shorten the life of your loan. Now look what happens. Your system once again is paying for itself immediately. If you apply the cash-based incentives, you get a big cash bump at the beginning of the system's life. The strong SRECs carry a positive slope on their cash flow curve, and then they're modeled at $450 per watt. So your slope increases yet again, so your return's even stronger. And then after year 6, we dropped our SRECs down to $150 per megawatt hour, and your slope goes negative. What this means is that your system's returns, so the energy savings from the solar generation, is slightly less than your loan payment, which means you have a negative slope, so you are actually going to be paying more for your loan than you're saving on your electricity bill in this scenario. But because of the major influx of cash early in the system life, you are still in fact cash flow positive. At the end of year 10, your cash flow curve slope goes extremely positive, almost 50% here, because your loan's paid off, so you effectively have zero expenses. So at this point, your system's paid off, you have no expensive, it's a pure profit machine. That was a great situation to be in. Now, as you can see, these curves and these lines, they look squiggly and slightly crazy, but by just looking at the curve and interpreting the slope of the line, it can really cue you in as to what's going on throughout your system's cash flow analysis. For instance, this little dip at year 7, what's that? Well, we know that it's the inverter replacement cost. And because we have the interest and the loan balance curves here, we can see what the finance expense, how that affects your system. So let's shift the financing just a little bit and make it a 10-year loan again at 4.5% and talk about what's going on here. Now in this situation, you're not cash flow positive from day one. You don't have to outlay any initial cash, as can be seen here, but you are going to need to pay on your loan. And because you're paying on your loan, you will be losing money every month when you make that payment, because the loan payment is going to be greater than the avoided cost of energy savings that you're getting from the PV system. So let's get rid of the financing, or real quickly, you can also do partial financing. Say you want to take a loan out on 50% of the system. You'd have to pay half the price in cash, and then you'd be paying the loan to cover the balance. And you can see right here, your initial cash outlay would be half the value of the system. The capital requirement would be the full system, because unless your contractor is floating you a loan until you get your rebates, you'd probably have to pay for that yourself. So you would take that out with your loan. Now we'll set this back to 0, and we'll just look at this real quickly as the basic use case for a PV system analysis a couple years ago. It hasn't really changed. The technique, that is, hasn't changed, but the numbers you input, of course, does change dramatically. So in this system, the ROI is 70.7% with a payback in 4 1/3 years. So 4 years, 4 months. That's a pretty excellent investment. So I hope this was useful in illustrating one of the most basic use cases of the HybridFAST tool, and you got a feel for how you can change the input values and immediately watch their effect on the output curves or the cash flow curve. So in the next example, we'll take a look at something a little bit more modern day, and we'll also take a look at the hybrid use case scenario and DC coupling with multi-port inverters. So thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.